Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to the UNISON launch of our Greening Public Services report called Getting to Net Zero in UK Public Services, the Road to Decarbonisation. Can I welcome you all? This is the first public meeting that we've had in West Campbell Street for 20 months, so it's a very warm welcome from UNISON Scotland to colleagues this afternoon. We have an exciting panel of trade union speakers today from UNISON, TUC, EPSU and PSI. I will introduce them individually as they go to the rostrum to speak, but they are absolutely at the forefront of the Green and Just Transition campaign to get just and fair deal for trade union members and workers as we decarbonise and transition to a net zero economy. UNISON has a proud policy and campaign record calling for the need for decarbonisation and climate action in public services. We have also worked in solidarity with our Global Trade Union Federation in the recognition that the North is responsible for 80% of the historic carbon emissions and that the burden to pay for the cost of climate solutions should not fall unfairly on the Global South to meet this climate emergency. At this COP26, one of the demands from the International Trade Union Congress is that we want to see governments set ambitious and realistic climate plans, because whilst we have policies, strategies and targets on paper, they are not yet clearly supported or funded effectively to ensure effective measures and actions to deliver them. In part, this is why and what has driven UNISON to produce this groundbreaking report that we're here today to launch. We want to answer simple questions. What are the plans for the UK public services to get to net zero? What needs to happen across public services and specific sectors to reach those targets? What timescales are there and what are we looking at? How much will it cost and how will our members be impacted on and involved in the delivery? So with those questions in mind, I will ask our first speaker to give us a summary of the report and what they actually found out for us. Our first speaker that I'm going to introduce today to talk about the report is one of the researchers that contributed to producing the report, Vera William. Vera's from Greenwich University, and she has a long history and record of producing significant reports for UNISON. Can I ask Vera to go to the rostrum? And Vera, I'm going to ask you just to take us through some of the key findings that you found in relation to the report and some of the key opportunities within UNISON that we will need to deliver this report in full. Thanks, Vera.
Hope you can hear me all right. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'm Vera William. I'm one of the authors of the report. I did it together with Anna and Mika from Transition Economics. Big credit to them who did basically the number crunching for this report. So I just want to highlight this up front, that it's a teamwork of us three. So what we did in this report, I'm going to be really brief, is like it's already been highlighting, how do we get to net zero within UK public services? just to flag out that UK public services are obviously contributing to emissions in the UK. So just to give you a rough idea, excluding transport, because our report excluded transport, about 8% from the UK's direct emissions come from greenhouse gas emissions in the public services. The NHS alone represents 4% of that. So public services need and can lead the way, and this is really what the report is about. So in order to get there, we have identified 21 different measures across the public services. And just to give you an overview of the sectors which were chosen with UNISON. So it's health, residential care, non-residential care, so we separated that out, local government, education, so school and universities, police and justice, housing association, water utilities, and the Environment Agency. So this is just the overview of the sectors. So in that, we focused on different areas of where it's possible to decarbonize, and we focused on the areas where there large investments are needed, not like the small bits, but more the bigger ones. So buildings, electricity generation, transport, land use, waste, and procurement. So these are the areas. So key findings, I mean, this is why I'm here today, to just highlight the juicy bits of the report, I guess. So the public services can lead the way to getting to net zero by 2050. However, we focused on an area from now to 2035, because this is the time scale when the decarbonisation would happen in the public sector, ideally. So the report estimates that it actually needs a capital investment of 140 billion. So that's quite a lot of money. And in addition to that, there will be like the annual operational expenditures, which will come to 1 billion roughly as well. So that's the investment which is required. Out of that, the vast majority should come directly from government, central government, and that is like 122 billion between now and 2035. So then, of course, we contrasted it to what is already happening, what is the government doing, and I guess this will not surprise many of you that it's far too little. So what we see at the moment is that the various measures from public sector decarbonisation all adds up to 8.2 billion from now to 2025. So if we would take only the current budget, we would have a shortfall of 113 billion between now and 35. However, it's, being nice and assuming that, there will be, this is only from the first spending review until 2025. So assuming that there's more money coming through after that, and if that is the same as now, we would still have a massive shortfall, and that would be of 90 billion. So not little money, and that's basically the key message, that there is not enough money here right now. So we need additional government funding, really, really key. And this needs to be a separate funding which is directly related to decarbonisation and not coming out of existing other funds. And obviously UNISON has done in the past great research of showing the impact of austerity, and also how austerity how big austerity is and affects local governments. So we see with great concern that in the recent Treasury report on net zero, just published a few weeks ago, they actually say that in order to fund net zero programs, and that's a quote, they may be met through lower public spending and reductions in public services and other areas. So if this comes to more austerity, that's of course very dangerous, especially as we all probably in this room all know that austerity affects the most vulnerable in society more, and who is contributing to the emissions are the wealthier. And that again, we see that the wealthier in higher income households in the UK consume 3 times as much carbon than lower income households. Then as well, public ownership is really key, because one of the government's big announcements of how they want to meet net zero, or how they want to raise the money, is through more private sector involvement. Boris Johnson even said he wants to unleash the creative powers of capitalism, direct quote, in order to meet net zero. So we would say that this is very dangerous. We need public ownership in this regard. Just to remind everybody that currently, if we look at different public sectors, the UK is losing 12.5 billion every year due to privatization. So these are, if we look at sectors of the NHS, energy, water utilities, rail, buses, Royal Mail and broadband. Greenwich has done a lot of research, or CSIRO at Greenwich has done a lot of research about this, and together with We Own It. And this, until 2035 alone, would be a shortfall of 175 billion. So we are losing money through privatization every year. And just the main part of the research is not to tell you where the money should be coming from, but just to highlight that it is possible to raise money. We just have to see across the channel and see at Biden's American job plan, which basically really goes away from a neoliberal idea of spending, says no to privatization, and has a fair and progressive taxation in it. So there are opportunities to fund net zero. And also another way to think about where should the money be coming from if we think about net zero is that actually it will pay back. So lots of the measures identified in this report actually show that they would be able to save money within 9 years' time. So, for example, if we make buildings more energy efficient, a lot of energy can be saved. So like the energy bills would be lower and so on, as well as circular economy approaches would also save money. So just one brief aspect as well, because this was about the money, where should the money come from for net zero? We also looked at jobs. That's my last slide, because I also only have 7 minutes. So there is a huge job potential in decarbonisation. So the modeling suggests that a direct job increase could be there of 240,000 jobs throughout the next 15 years. Ideally, it's a bit like how would it be calculated? We even it out throughout the whole period. It's a bit more likely that there would be more jobs in the beginning and less later, but this is like if you would even it out. And most of it would be in retrofitting of social homes. So I stop here because 8 minutes. And I thank you very much. But I really welcome questions, and the report is out now, so you can read it, and just feel free to get in touch with me or Mika and Anna. We really welcome feedback and your direct contributions, and we will also continue to work on this a bit longer. So thank you very much for this.
Vera, thank you very much for what is a fantastic report. And could you take our thanks back to your colleagues, Mika and Anna, and our gratitude for the detailed work to produce such a fantastic report. Colleagues, I'm going to keep us going because we are constrained for time. As we've said, we only have 1 hour, and we have some fantastic contributions for you this afternoon. Our next speaker, and it gives me absolute great pleasure to introduce the first female General Secretary of UNISON, Christina McAnea, to talk and discuss with you around the report. Christina, we've heard that there are some key challenges ahead for public services to decarbonise, and in particular, whilst public services are approximately 8% directly responsible for the emissions, as Vera said, the investment in public services to get to net zero will absolutely need to be urgently provided. And we know that, and we need to push that through government channels to make sure that our public services get that additional support and investment. What will that mean for our public sector workers? Who will be directly impacted by the government's decarbonising fund decisions, and who have the important role as public sector workers to decarbonise their workplaces. So Christina, could you perhaps answer some of those questions and just focus in and around some of the key points within our report? Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
Mind if I close it? Thanks, Lilian, and thank you very much for coming today. And I'd like to echo what Lilian just said and thank Vera for presenting this amazing report, and to the other two contributing researchers, Anna and Mika. And I would also like to thank Alison Roche, our UNISON's policy officer, for the brilliant work she's done. And I can't not mention Stephen Smiley, because he's a UNISON NEC member from Scotland who's done a fantastic job and all the work around UNISON's contribution to COP26. So I really want to thank him. But also thanks to and thanks to those of you who've come. I know it's a small group, but it's a very small but important group. And I want to thank our young members from the Northern region who've come up, UNISON's Northern region, who've come here today, and our energy members, Monica Lennon from Scottish Labour, and Tony Wright, who's our chair of UNISON's policy committee. So thank you all for taking the time to come here today. And also, I was here on Friday. I actually joined the Glasgow City branch on Friday when the young members were coming into Glasgow, and that was a fantastic atmosphere. And then I was also with Roz and various other people when we were on Saturday. So it was Friday was the young people's one. Saturday was the main, what was called the main march, and it was a fantastic atmosphere. But it was very typical Glasgow weather, where there was horizontal rain. But actually, it was just brilliant to see the level of support and commitment there was. So this report is definitely groundbreaking. I think it's something we've been looking for a while, which is the hard evidence about what it will take to decarbonise public services, and it's laid out a kind of realistic path for us to go forward, and some very clear campaigning messages for us to take forward to governments across the UK. And as the largest public sector union, it's important that we know what needs to be done to make real change, and critically how much it will cost, so that we do get securely on the path to net zero by 2035 and a smooth full transition to 2050. And I'm proud of the fact that UNISON's always been a campaigning union. We work with our international colleagues. We support our colleagues in more developing, poorer countries who have been, as Lilian said, bearing the brunt, as we know, of the climate emergency. But also, I'm very proud of the fact that as UNISON, I know that whenever I see, particularly in this country, stories of, you see on the news, some emergency, some disaster that's happened, a terrible flooding in some of our communities, or, something's gone wrong and people have been cut off from water or their energy supplies. And I know that the people who get the call in the middle of the night, the people who are there working with local communities, will be public sector workers, and a large group of them will be our members. And that's from across local government, health, our emergency service workers, our energy service workers, our environment workers. They will be there at the heart, working with their communities, keeping people safe, giving them food, shelter, making sure they get essential services turned on. And so I'm really proud of the work that our members do, and deeply grateful to them for that. And building a resilient green economy as part of the UK's recovery from the pandemic presents us with a once-in-a-generation time opportunity that we must make the UK government stand up to. They must take this seriously. All of our public sector organisations, the buildings, the infrastructure, the work that they do, all needs to decarbonise, and that's across everything. You go into a hospital, you see the reuse of one-use equipment, and I understand why it happens. But when you're sitting there, you're thinking, God, that's a lot of waste. And then you replicate that across all of our public services, and you can see why we do need a proper commitment to decarbonise. The task is big, but not impossible. It can't be impossible. Otherwise, the world has no future. Public services do play a vital role in this, in actually implementing and planning the path to decarbonisation. And they should be at the centre of our efforts to do this. We need to make sure there are greener outcomes nationally, regionally, locally, in workplaces and in our communities. And it should be our members, public sector workers across, who are the drivers of that change. Because not only does it impact on the services that we provide and our members provide, but actually it impacts across all of our communities. And now is a perfect time to put in place government funding for things like just transition, for green procurement and commissioning policies. In short, if the UK wants to meet its public service decarbonisation and net zero targets, it must act now and it must act quickly. And the key findings set out in this report, they actually set out the challenges very clearly. And we're asking for some very clear things from this government. And you heard Vera talk about the cost, you know, over 140 billion needed from now up until 2035. And she set out some of the ways that money could be found. But you think of some of the money the Westminster government has spent over the past 20 months. And I'll just give you one quick example: £37 billion on test and trace for England, a complete and utter disaster and waste of time. That money could so much better have been spent towards some other very significant things. But we know that we can't just leave it up to public sector organisations because they don't have the funding. And so we need government to actually have a separate fund, a specific fund given to public sector organisations in order that they can achieve the green outcomes that they need, and make sure these aren't done in an ad hoc or piecemeal way, or that it diverts funds away from already overstretched public sector budgets. And our report shows that the sooner we begin to fund the decarbonisation of public services, the quicker we make savings and lower costs, and you know, has been said, actually will pay for itself in the longer term. So let's be clear: public services can lead the way, but only provided the government gives the right funding. Secondly, the government must set up a separate and significant climate change budget specifically for public services. And finally, we are calling on the government to say you must enter into a social dialogue, social partnership with trade unions across the UK to make this a reality. Because having that social dialogue, social partnership is the key to success to a just transition. Public sector workers and their unions must be part of the dialogue, because we need to make sure that transition is just and fair. And what do we mean by that? We mean that jobs are not only protected, but we actually grow more jobs. We mean that public services are made sustainable going forward. We mean that lives are improved, not just work. And we mean the lives, everybody's health and well-being in this country and across the globe. And engaging with workers in the workplace is the way to make that happen. And when we talk about workplaces, I think we can't forget the amazing work that we do, that our green reps do. UNISON already has 400 green reps. I'm sure other unions have numbers of green reps as well. And they do a fantastic job in actually keeping that on the agenda with their employers and with the organisations they're based in. And we've argued that the government must mandate to make public sector employers give agreed workplace facilities and time off to union green reps. And this is all the more urgent now. Because if we do act, then when we could look back in years to come, and maybe just 2 or 3 years to come, look back and see that Glasgow was the start of something different. We actually made a difference going forward. And let's make that our ambition going forward. How amazing would that be? For all of us to be able to look back and say we were part of that. So let's keep up the campaign. Let's make sure that this happens. Now, we know we can all do our own bit, and that's a really clear message to send out. But actually, individual effort won't make this the right level of change and impact. And we can all do our things in the workplace, but what we need to do is make sure that it's all the employers, it's all of the organisations we're involved with, and critically, it's our governments in this country and the pressure we can get them to put on governments across the world that will make the difference. So thank you again for this fantastic report. And I, Unison is 100% committed to pushing this agenda and making sure that it becomes a reality going forward. We have no choice. This has to be our top priority. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Christina. Fantastic contribution and a recognition that this is a significant and top priority for Unison going forward. And can I just move us on, colleagues? I'm conscious of time and I do want to get through all our speakers today. And now turn to our next speaker, Paul Novak. Paul's the Deputy General Secretary for the TUC. Paul, the TUC, like the STUC, has an important role in negotiating a just transition on behalf of their workers with governments. And I'm delighted today that Ros Foy, the General Secretary of the STUC, is also with us this afternoon for the launch of our report. In light of Unison's findings and recommendations, can you tell us just a little bit about the work of the TUC is doing in terms of the climate emergency and the decarbonisation agenda? And in particular, Paul, can you sit back down? Can you, Paul, just tell us about some of the engagements that have been happening with the UK government and how we can take those engagements forward, and what you think the government's response will be to the Unison report, and what do you think the government response should be to our report? Thanks, Paul.
Well, thanks, Lilian, and thanks for the opportunity to say a few words on behalf of the TUC. And it is an absolute privilege to be here with you today and with Christina and other colleagues to be at the launch of this. I think it is a fantastic new report. And that's not a word I'd use lightly, but it's a report that actually puts public services at the heart of our efforts to decarbonise our economy and to achieve net zero. And that's important. I mean, all too often, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody else, when we talk about net zero, we have visions of wind turbines. We think about energy-intensive industries. We think about electric vehicles and gigafactories. All of this is really important. But as this report makes clear, it is absolutely vital that we think about how we decarbonise our public services. Vital because, as Vera said before, just under 10% of our greenhouse emissions in the UK come from our public services. But vital as well because we know that a greener, smarter, better funded public sector has a key role to play in driving decarbonisation right across our economy, whether that's further education, giving people the skills they need throughout their working lives to adapt to the transition, or whether that's about local government pulling together local transition plans, local stakeholders to really build on local strengths and opportunities. So as you sort of suggested, Lilian, what I'm going to do is focus my remarks really on the work the TUC has been doing with unions, with employers, crucially with the UK government to try and make the case for action to deliver a just transition. Before I do, I think it is worthwhile pointing out the huge amount of work that is being done by unions and union centres across all of the regions and nations of the UK. You mentioned Lilian Ros Foy and the work that the STUC has been doing, influencing that Just Transition Commission, in particular making the case for a fair transition for workers in oil and gas. In Wales, Shavana Taj in the Wales TUC, pushing hard with the Welsh Government on that agenda around green and environmental reps. And in the English regions, we've got examples of unions and regional TUCs working with city regions from the northeast through Yorkshire and Humber, the northwest, southwest, right across the English regions on a whole range of things, everything from carbon capture and storage to thinking about the potential for offshore wind and so on. Nationally as well, we've tried to bring our unions together to really nail down what a just transition means for our members. Matt Lay's here from Unison. I know your energy sector played a key role in that work. We've been making the case for a balanced green energy mix and for the government to invest in that balanced green energy mix. And we've been trying to put the issues that matter to working people, their families and communities at the door of government in this debate about just transition. Just at the end of last year, me and Sue Ferns, who's now the TUC's president, were appointed by the government, unusual for a Conservative government, I have to say, to the government's Green Jobs Task Force, which brought together the Department of Business, Department for Education, Work and Pensions, unions and employers to really think about the potential. What needs to happen? What does government need to do to make green jobs a reality? And I think maybe if I concentrate, Lilian, just on three areas of overlap between this report and the report of the Green Jobs Task Force, which we published in July. The government's picked up a couple of elements of the Green Jobs Task Force. We're pushing them to pick up every element of it, but I think there's some clear overlap, which is important to highlight. The first is this, and it's already been said, but absolutely, we need a step change in the level of investment from the UK government in a just transition and in terms of getting to net zero, if we're going to move from rhetoric around green jobs and a green economy to the reality. Now, you can express this in different ways. In your report, you talk about £122 billion needed from the government until 2035. In the Green Jobs Task Force, we talked about targeted investment focused on areas where we're going to create green jobs that would bring us at least level with the G7 average. At the moment, we're second from bottom in the G7 league table in terms of investments in green jobs. In the TUC, we've called for £42 billion a year over the next 2 years alone, just to kickstart that building of our green infrastructure and the creation of green jobs. Now, all of those calls are slightly different over slightly different timescales, but the one thing they have in common is, I think, a sense of ambition and aspiration. And Vera mentioned the US. At the moment, the Biden administration is on course to spend £3,000 per head of population over the next course of the decade to green the US economy. In the UK, the figure is £180 per head. That gives you a bit of a sense of the gulf between rhetoric and reality. Second call from us really is a recognition the government doesn't have all the answers and that there is a value in government bringing together unions, employers, other key stakeholders to take the social partnership approach that's outlined in your report. And again, in the report, UNISON called for a Just Transition Commission for the public sector. Green Jobs Task Force, we talked about a UK-wide body to oversee workforce transition. Generally, in the TUC, we've got a long-standing call for a National Just Transition Commission that would be underpinned by local and regional commissions as well. But the whole point of that really is that, you know, this is going to be a programme of action that goes across political cycles, goes across different governments, and we need to keep government honest and hold government to account. If government is going to spend tens of billions of pounds of taxpayers' money in greening our economy, we want to make sure it's being spent well and it's being spent on building our public services, building our green infrastructure, supporting green jobs. And that brings me, Lilian, to my third and final point, really, which is absolutely critical from a union perspective, and that is the potential here in terms of creating, not just creating and protecting jobs, but creating and protecting good quality jobs as well. Now, this isn't easy. Not every green job at the moment is a good job. We know that for a fact. But your report points out some of the levers that we could pull at a local level, a regional level, a national level, international level, to make sure that those green jobs are indeed good jobs, whether it's about using procurement more effectively, whether it's about preventing companies that blacklist workers for trade union activity from getting government contracts, whether it's about investment in local efforts around workforce reskilling and training and development, enforcement of basic international labour standards and so on. And crucially, giving unions access to these new green jobs as well, because the best guarantee of ensuring a green job is a good job is making sure they're unionised jobs. And again, that was a key feature of the Green Jobs Task Force report as well. We said that government should measure the impact its investment is having in terms of creation of good quality employment, because obviously we want to get to net zero, but we want to get to net zero on the back of good quality employment, diverse employment actually as well, to make sure that women and black workers have access to those job opportunities as well, but really putting a laser-like focus on good quality employment at the heart of things. A lot of other things to say, Lilian, but I'm conscious of the time. I would just say, I think this report actually reflects a growing consensus across the public and the private sector, a real direction of travel from unions, employers, and other, that there is now the time for the government to step up on this agenda. It won't be easy. We saw the budget just last week, was it? Not one single penny new allocated, certainly to greening our public services. We had a reduction in regional passenger duty, but nothing positive about just transition. But I'm confident with UNISON's 1.2 million members, with the trade union movement, 6 million members, we can raise our voices collectively to make the case for green jobs, a green economy, and a just transition. Thanks very much.
Paul, thanks very much for your contribution. Fantastic to hear what's happening across the UK in terms of the trade union movement and the opportunities that exist in terms of us raising our voices to get those jobs and to get those high quality jobs in place to move to a green transition. Colleagues, I'm going to move us on now to our next speaker, and I now want to invite Willem, the General Secretary of EPSU, the European Federation of Public Service Unions. Willem, 18 months ago, you responded to the EU Commission's Green New Deal by saying, whilst EPSU welcome the New Deal, it must be accompanied by equally ambitious, just transition strategies for workers and local communities, and a strong role for the public sector. Can you tell us a bit more about EPSU's response to the European Green New Deal and the work EPSU affiliates are doing, and if there are any EU countries or sectors in the public sectors getting it right, and could you share that with us today? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you all. Also, I'm very happy to be here. Also for me, one of the first occasions to be outside of, in this case, Belgium, meeting other people, meeting comrades in UNISON, other unions here in COP, and talking what is needed for our joint future. EPSU is a European Trade Union Federation of Public Service Workers across all European countries, the UK, Ireland, other countries in the European Union, but also Turkey, Russia, and the Ukraine, for example. And that, I hope, will come back in some of the points I raised. First of all, thanks to UNISON for this report, not just for the invitation, always welcome, but thanks to UNISON for the report, because I think it will help also our affiliates to raise these issues which you have in the report with their employers, with their public services, with their public authorities. There are not so many of those reports which try to calculate what it actually means for public services, what is the investment need. So I think this will help. It will also help us in the European Union to raise this with the European Commission. I think what is also important in the report is the link it makes with just transition principles, the impact of the measures on workers, but also on others in our community, low-income users. The report refers to energy poverty, for example. There's about 15 million people in energy poverty across the European Union. So that's a very important point to raise. I want to link it also with the statement which has been adopted, and I think the trade unions were very influential in that at COP26 around just transition, trying to give a little bit more detail. The UK government signed up, the European Commission signed up to that, as well as a number of other European governments. And I think this is something, together with the report, we can use to raise these issues and get into a discussion with our employers and our governments. For us, on the trade union side, we also link that with actually trying to strengthen our rights to information and consultation, stronger collective bargaining rights, to have agreements with the employers. As Christina referred to the trade union, the environmental trade union reps, I think that is a good example for us across Europe. And I think this report can also help the unions in other countries where just transition is not yet as high on the agenda as it should be, and I think it will help. It also puts in perspective, there were a couple of references earlier to the forest fires, the flooding there has been in Europe this summer, and we have seen the scientific report of the International Panel on Climate Change, which gives the context how urgent it is to act. So in the European Union, we've had a Green Deal, as Lily referred to. We've welcomed the Green Deal. It's a step forward. It's very ambitious in what it wants to achieve. Climate neutrality in the European Union by 2050. It has a comprehensive set of policies to look at improving water quality, soil quality, addressing biodiversity, making about the circular economy. So quite ambitious in its ambition. And this summer, the European Commission followed up with what it's called the Fit for 55 package of measures. Fit for 55, a 55% reduction of CO2 emissions compared to 1990 by 2030. So very ambitious to do, and that will mean a revision of all legislation, the renewables legislation, energy efficiency legislation, emission trading system legislation, some of the legislation which also is still in effect in the UK. There's going to be a number of new measures. Here in the COP there's been discussion about the carbon border adjustment mechanism, forest strategy, and so on, and a social climate fund, not unimportant, and a reflection and a response to the demands of the trade unions. The biggest hole in all of this, as in the UK, is about funding. There is funding in the European Union. There's been they have created the large pot of money for recovery and resilience. It's seen as helping also coming out of the pandemic, restarting, kickstarting the economy, and also greening the economy. So in itself, I think that is positive, but the whole strategy is still very much part of the market-driven approach. And the reliance on the public service to deliver is not recognized in this strategy. So a couple of concerns in the report of UNISON are concerns we share. First of all, is that the market is will not deliver on these goals. The market doesn't have that ambition to deliver. Later this week, I think there will be with PSI a report of the Trade Union for Energy Democracy network, which will look at how we can drive a public energy system to deliver. But one of the messages of that report is that the market hasn't delivered. I mean, emissions actually are still increasing, and the market is not delivering that. Neither is it delivering the funding which is needed. The report of UNISON refers to the risk is that whatever funding is made available will be channeled into a new effort for public-private partnership, or I think you call that public finance initiative here in the UK. And I think our experience with that has not been very positive, neither in the UK nor in other European countries. I mean, we often say that a bit slogan-esque, we socialize the risk and privatize the profits. Well, that is what PFI is. A third point, which is very important for us at European level, is the reference to austerity and how austerity has undermined our public services, but also the expectation that austerity policies come back into fashion again. I think there has been in the pandemic a recognition that these cuts in public funding are not going to deliver, but we already see in Europe, but I think also in the UK, politicians coming back with their, hawkish policies with regard to public finance. Well, that is not going to help our membership who are addressing flooding, our membership who is addressing forest fires and other challenges for our communities. The fourth observation is that we need to look at how this works with our tax system. I was speaking this morning with one of my comrades coming here about how the way in which many of the challenges are addressed currently are having a high income, middle income approach. I mean, it's easy for somebody with a lot of money to buy an electric vehicle, but if you don't have, if you're on low pay, you just don't have the money. So we need to also reform our tax system, what we call tax justice, and redistribute wealth to make up the money to pay for this. So redistribution of wealth is very important in this. I think it's very interesting. The young kids young kids and younger people who were here in Glasgow on Friday, or in Brussels, where I do my work. They don't just say climate change. They say climate change, no. System change, yes, on their little plunket. I think they have understood very well what it is. And the last point, the European Commission has also introduced a social fund, making money available, and that's welcome, but it is nowhere near enough to fund this transition and help workers and our membership. So thanks to UNISON for the report. Thanks for the invitation. And it is a report that we can use very well also in our work in the rest of Europe. Thank you very much.
Willem, thank you very much for your contribution. Colleagues, I'm going to move us on, and I now turn to our final speaker, David Boyes. David is the Deputy General Secretary of PSI. David, significant members of PSI in the Global South will increasingly be impacted on by climate change more than in the North. We hear a lot of talk about climate resilience and the definition around the ability to survive, to adapt, to sustain and improve the likelihood of no matter what kinds of climate stresses and shocks are experienced. So how are PSI workers negotiating a fair and just climate emergency response, and are governments actually listening to the just transition demands?
Okay, thank you, Lily. I'll take my cap off for this, even though I get blinded by the lights. Look, I'm the last speaker, so I've got 15 minutes, right, to do the whole world. Because look, PSI brings together 700 unions from 155 countries, representing 30 million working women and men. And I can say that UNISON is one of our most loyal and supportive unions, and has been for ages. And our first woman General Secretary, Rosa Pavanelli, would be here with your first woman General Secretary, Christina, had she not got a wicked flu and her doctor said, "You're not going to Glasgow, not a chance." So you get me, sorry, but let me just say that having a woman GS has really moved a lot of issues in PSI. We're hearing about the connected crises, not just climate, inequality, health, energy. 800 million people don't have access, biodiversity, jobs, and public service austerity. One of the questions I have, and again, the terms are pretty tricky around climate, because net zero is a target, but a number of countries are using this to delay action until 2050, or India until 2070. So we've got to be really clear when we talk about net zero that we mean action now. Let me just say really clearly that women are the majority of PSI members, because public services are mainly delivered by women across the world. We've got a couple of sectors where that's the exception, and Matt, you know what I'm talking about, but 70% of our members are women, and oftentimes they're underpaid, undervalued, overworked, not trained enough, don't have good enough tools. All of these are issues we have to address, whether in this country or in a majority of the countries of the South. So for us in PSI, what we need to do is more education on climate issues and on the interconnectedness of all the other crises, more networking between unions, but also within the community, within the users of public services, and then move to mobilizations, because it's going to happen in the streets. This is what we're hearing. We hear it time and again. It's not happening over there in the tech center, in the exhibition center. It's got to be in the streets. Look, the UN agreed what they call the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, which are very ambitious, which depend a lot on universal access to quality public services. But the UN and the World Bank and the IMF focus on innovative finance. Innovative finance sounds cool, but actually it's just public subsidies for private profits. Now they're talking about, can the public sector de-risk, is the favorite term now, de-risking. When you hear de-risking, you know what you're hearing. And so, but what we're seeing is it's not working. The money's not moving. They've been talking about this innovative finance now for 8-10 years. It's not happening. And so it's not about to happen just because of this. So look, to deal with issues in the South, we need to fix a lot of the global governance issues, including this pro-market mindset that led to Carilion here, but leads to many more screw-ups across the world. And the IMF and World Bank have tons of influence in the South. Now, your governments sit on the boards of the IMF and set the policies of the IMF, and they are totally pro-market, anti-public services, pro-austerity. They use their loans and grants to impose conditionalities, forcing them to change their own laws and regulations to create what's called the enabling environment for protecting investors and for protecting, private equity giants like BlackRock. They're getting really hungry for our public services across the world. But in the South, they demand a higher rate of return because there's more risk, so more public subsidies. But my point on that is that what happens in your government has a direct influence in the global South through your representatives on the World Bank, on the IMF, at the OECD, and a range of other institutions where we have to stitch together our lobbying in a much more coherent and unified manner. And a lot of the IMF and World Bank conditionalities that impose privatization and austerity also advise governments to destroy public sector unions. They have specific recommendation of getting rid of all of us because we know we're a pain in their, we know that we resist their policies. We will fight to the death. Look, our people in the South are also concerned about the free trade deals, which now just protect investors and allow them to bypass governments and block pro-climate regulations, pro-social services. So for us in the South, what is the key issue? Universal access to quality public services. A lot of us take it for granted, even though in the UK that's not taken for granted. I've seen some of the reports from the UN Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty, on how many people don't have access here. But in developing countries, it's even worse. So we distinguish between developing countries that do have decent infrastructure and services and those that still don't. And there's too many countries that don't. So in the countries where they do have them, priority number one, keep the privateers away. Because once they get a hold of the public services, they suck all the money out and they block all change. And in energy, what they do is they go for natural gas and diesel, and they're not making the change to renewables. So we've got to build out to ensure universal access. And then we've got to maintain the existing infrastructure and services. And that actually costs a lot of money. Maintenance, you got to have qualified staff. You got to pay them decent working conditions, no outsourcing. So, climate proofing what we have is, hey, can we even keep what we have running, let alone doing what your ambitious document is saying? In countries without good public services and infrastructure, find the money to build, develop the skills to build green first. So we're saying in countries where access to electricity is not networked and not universal, don't use coal or diesel. Go straight to renewables. Build up your system that way. I'm aware that I've got a little bit of time problem here. Can I get 2 more minutes? 1 minute. 1 minute. Okay. Look, one of the problems we're seeing in the South caused by climate is migration. Migration within countries, those are what are called internally displaced people, and climate refugees. This is a huge piece of work for local and regional governments in countries that receive them. And, we think everybody's coming to Europe. 85% of the refugees are in developing countries. They're not here. So they're in countries that have even less capabilities. So look, for us, as I said, there's much more to talk about. There's not enough time. We really appreciate the support of unions like UNISON, because without you, we can't do our work in the South. But we are going to raise the bar a bit for you to pay more attention to what your government is doing in those institutions that set the terms and conditions for our members and for policies in the South. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, David. Thanks for your contribution, and thank you very much for keeping to time as well. I've been warned about you, so I was going to pull you off, but anyway, you kept very well to time, so thank you. Colleagues, you've heard from our speakers, and I think you'll agree with me, what fantastic depth and wealth of knowledge and contributions that we've had today. Huge amounts of information for us to digest, and huge amount for us to take back to our constituents and communities to have those conversations. Unfortunately, there's not enough time to open up to the floor to take questions. So I'm going to abuse the chair's privilege and ask the panel just to respond very quickly to a question that I want to pose to them. So before I do that, though, I do want to recognise the huge amount of work that's been done in this space today and in the past in terms of the climate emergency. But taking part today, the trade union representatives are taking part in this COP26, and they are part of the ITUC's observer delegation. And in the room today, we have our very own, as Christina said, our very own NEC member and deputy convener, Stephen Smiley, who is representing UNISON at that delegation. And we want to thank Stephen for the work that he's done, particularly in the Green Network in UNISON Scotland, but also on the NEC in raising this hugely important agenda. We've heard colleagues through the last few days and weeks from the COP26, some of the uncertain commentary that we've heard from governments and leaders on whether COP26 will be successful. And some of that language, though, in terms of hope and optimism, we've heard from some of the civic society groups. How do we change that language into more positive contributions and more positive commitments from the governments across the world to ensure that we come away from COP with some progressive, ambitious plans that will see our society change for the better? So my question therefore is around, what do you think that we will achieve at the end of this COP for workers? Because that's why we're here, to talk about workers. And what next as we leave COP26 in terms of continuing our campaign work around a just transition? And what pressure should we place on employers and government? And how do we do that collectively as a movement to ensure that we get what we're looking for through this COP26? I'm going to ask colleagues just to respond very briefly in 1 minute. And I'm going to start with yourself, David.
And I'll just grab this microphone. What's going to come out for workers? Well, I'll be honest, probably not enough. Well, definitely not enough. Just transition is a good pillar to focus on workers, but the language is being used and abused by companies for blue wash and green wash to make themselves look good. What do we need to do? I think in public services, we have a unique position because people in the communities depend on the quality of the services we provide. We can reach out to them much better. One of the things that I know that we're trying to connect is, especially concerning the Global South, is the debt movement. So many countries are spending 4 or 5 times more servicing debt to the north than they are on climate. And so that's got to change. So we've got to look at that because, again, our members depend on public budgets. If there's no public money, then we don't get tools, we don't get jobs, we don't get pay. So we need to be engaged in the whole public policy arena, but we need to recognize that the labor movement on its own needs allies. We've got to reach out. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what we've got, Lilian, I mean, I think that language, the statements around just transition is important, but we know that a statement doesn't cut it in and of itself. And so now's the time to hold national governments to account in terms of what they actually put in their nationally defined contributions, what are their action plans to deliver just transition. But 3 quick things, I think, from me. First of all, continues to make that case for the UK government to invest big in the transition and to call them out when they don't invest big, because there's no way the Tory government is going to pony up £122 billion at the moment. Secondly, I think we should, UNISON working with all of our unions through the Public Services Liaison Group, we should formulate what does that concrete call for a just transition in the public sector look like. There's no reason why government shouldn't be around the table with all of our public sector unions talking about just transition. And the third thing is just, Christina mentioned environmental reps or green reps or net zero reps or whatever you want to call them. But actually, we don't have to wait for legislation in that space. We should be now putting a demand on the table with public sector employers. We want the space for our reps to engage you on these issues because they matter to our members and they matter to the future of our environment and planets as well.
Paul. Vera, do you want to respond?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the report highlights it quite well and very simple. So if we want to get to net zero, we need action, you know, not just nice words, but really action. Without money, there will be no action. So where should the money coming from? We have all highlighted it here, like definitely not just from the private sector. Yes, we need to make sure that the private sector, we keep it accountable, but we are losing money through privatization every year. So public ownership is key. We should not take the funding away from people who need it through austerity cuts in this country. And yeah, Christina has highlighted it really well. You know, track and trace says it all. I mean, if we can waste almost like, you know, 37 billion in track and trace, like over like, you know, the last 2 years, we know the money can be found and it must be found. And other countries have done it. And so I encourage everyone to read the report, to know our numbers, to campaign with it, and also, yeah, look to the US and say, okay, Biden is currently doing it, and we should follow suit in the UK, here, and across the globe. Thank you.
Thanks, Vera. Jan Willem, do you want just to respond very quickly?
Yeah, very. In the European Union, we work, for example, with the Right to Energy coalition.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just some short points, as most people have covered it, but I think in the short term, one of the first things we need to do is share this report with all of our major employers and organisations that we negotiate with, get it on their agenda, actually get meetings with them, get them talking about this, and linked very closely to that is to make sure that this is on our agenda across all of UNISON occupational and bargaining groups, that actually when we talk about just transition, we're talking about a just transition in each of these sectors, whether it's the energy sector, whether it's local government, whether it's health or any of our other groups. What will it mean in those individual workplaces? And thirdly, I think listening to our international colleagues in particular has just reinforced my commitment. Tony's here, he's chair of our policy committee. I hope his commitment to the committee's commitment to actually making sure that we continue to work very closely with our international colleagues and keep up the pressure on climate change across the world, because there can be no justice in the developing world, in our country, unless we get justice in the developing worlds, because we're all so closely interlinked. So that's a very important point for us. Thank you.
Can I thank all our panellists and speakers today on your behalf, and I can also thank colleagues in the room for your participation and presence here today. This is a hugely ambitious report that we commend to you to read, as Christina says, and engage with your employers. Can I thank those who are watching the live stream or who are watching on some of the UNISON platforms? Can I also say that if my key message from me today, if you are not a member of a trade union, then join a trade union and get involved. Also, if you work in public services, join UNISON. Thanks very much for listening.